You think you know what a bad day is? Try this on for size. The sky over the territory had turned the color of a bad bruise. 1 minute, Sam McCarthy was riding the fence line, minding his own business. The next, the world dissolved into a screaming wall of sand and fury. The wind howled like a banshee, ripping at his hat, stinging his eyes, trying to tear him right out of the saddle. His horse, Diablo, fought him every step of the way, a dark shape against a world gone mad. Sam was a man who understood the desert. He understood its quiet lethality, its sudden rages. He'd buried a wife in this unforgiving land, and he was raising an 8-year-old daughter, Molly, all on his own. He'd sworn off complications. He'd sworn off trouble. But trouble, it seems, hadn't sworn off him. Because that's when he saw her. A ghost. A phantom in torn silk, stumbling through the sagebrush like she'd been spat out of the storm itself. Her hair was a black river whipping wild in the wind, and that dress had no business being out here. It was the kind of thing you'd see at a high society ball in New York City, not in God's forsaken country where the only currency was grit and sweat. She moved like a spooked doe, her head on a swivel, running from something far worse than the weather. As he drew closer, she looked up, and Sam felt the air get punched right out of his lungs. Her eyes weren't just scared. They held secrets, the kind of secrets that could get a man killed. "Please," she gasped, her voice a thin thread against the gale. "Help me." Sam's hands, calloused and hard from a life of work, tightened on the reins. Every instinct he had, every lesson the harsh frontier had taught him, screamed at him to turn Diablo around and ride away. This woman was a storm all on her own, and he'd had enough of storms to last a lifetime. He could leave her. Let the desert decide her fate. It was the smart thing to do, the safe thing to do. But Sam McCarthy, for all his hard edges, had never been a man to take the easy way out. He watched her stumble, her legs giving out as she fell to her knees in the dirt. The torn silk of her dress rode up her thigh, revealing a flash of pale skin that had never seen a day of honest sun or hard labor. And in that moment, seeing her so broken, so out of place, so utterly alone, Sam knew he was already lost. He swung himself down from Diablo, his boots sinking into the churning sand. He approached her slow, the way you'd approach a cornered animal, hands out and open. Up close, she was even more of a contradiction. The pearls at her throat, though caked with dust, were real. The fine lace at her collar, though ripped, was expensive. This wasn't some farmer's wife who'd lost her way. This was money, old money, frightened money. "What's a lady like you doing out in this mess?" he asked, his voice a low rumble against the wind's shriek. She flinched, her wide, terrified eyes darting past him, searching the swirling dust for something he couldn't see. "Wagon train," she said, the lie coming out practiced and smooth. "Bandits. They attacked. I was the only one who got away." Sam had heard that story before. It was a common enough tragedy out here. But the way she said it, the way her eyes refused to meet his, it didn't sit right. A woman who'd survived a bandit attack would be hysterical or numb with shock. This woman was calculating. Even in her terror, he could see the gears turning behind her eyes. Still, the storm was getting worse. A blue norther was rolling in, and the temperature was dropping fast. Whatever secret she was hiding, she'd be a frozen corpse by morning if he left her. "All right then," he grunted, making a decision he knew he'd probably regret. He reached down and offered her his hand. "My cabin ain't far. It's warm and it's dry. More than you'll get out here." For a second she hesitated. Her eyes scanned his face, his worn clothes, the Colt peacemaker strapped to his hip. She was weighing her options, deciding if the devil she could see was better than the one she was running from. Finally, her small, soft hand slipped into his. Her skin was like silk against his calloused palm. He pulled her to her feet and swung her up onto Diablo's back, then mounted in front of her. "Hold on tight," he ordered. She didn't need to be told twice. Her arms wrapped around his waist, her body pressing against his back. And just like that, Sam's 3 years of lonely, quiet resolve shattered into a million pieces. The shock of her touch, the scent of lavender and rain in her hair, the soft curves pressed against him. It was a ghost of a life he'd thought was long dead and buried. He urged Diablo forward into the teeth of the storm, with a beautiful, dangerous lie clinging to his back. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But he knew one thing for certain. He had just invited the biggest trouble of his life to his own front door. The cabin was a small, stubborn thing, built of sturdy pine and tucked into a fold of red rock that offered some protection from the wind. To Sam, it was a fortress. To his daughter Molly, it was the whole world. As they rode into the clearing, a warm yellow light spilled from the window, a beacon in the gloom. The door creaked open and Molly's small face, framed by a mess of blonde braids, peered out. "Daddy!" she cried, relief flooding her voice. She ran out onto the porch, her little legs pumping, but skidded to a halt when she saw the stranger clinging to her father. Sam swung down and reached up to help the woman. "It's all right, sweet pea," he said to Molly. "This is, uh, He realized he still didn't know her name. The woman slid gracefully from the horse, a move that spoke of expensive riding lessons and manicured stables. She smoothed down her ruined dress and gave Molly a small, weary smile. "Catherine," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, "but my friends call me Kate." The name felt as foreign on his tongue as her silk dress felt in his hands. He ushered them inside into the small, warm space that smelled of wood smoke, coffee, and his daughter's simple existence. Kate stood dripping by the hearth, a strange, exotic bird in their humble nest. The firelight danced on her face, chasing away some of the shadows and revealing a beauty that was almost painful to look at. Molly stared, wide-eyed, from behind Sam's legs. This was the first woman, other than the stern schoolteacher in town, that she'd seen in the cabin since her mother died. I, I have a box," Kate said suddenly, her voice tight. "It was on my saddle. It's very important." Sam raised an eyebrow. "Your wagon train was attacked by bandits. You barely escaped with your life, and you're worried about a box?" Her chin lifted, a flash of defiance in her tired eyes. "It's all I have left," she whispered. It sounded like another lie, but there was a desperate truth hiding underneath it. He sighed. "I'll get it." He stepped back out into the raging storm, the wind trying to rip the door from his hand. He found the small, leather-bound trunk strapped to the back of a spooked horse that had followed them. One of the wagon trains, he presumed. The box was heavier than it looked, and it was locked tight with a strange, intricate brass latch. It felt important. It felt dangerous. Back inside, he set the box down by the fire. Kate practically lunged for it, her hands tracing its edges, possessively. She clutched it to her chest like a child with a favorite doll, her shoulders finally slumping in relief. Whatever was in that box was the reason she was out here. He'd bet his ranch on it. "You need to get out of those wet things," he said, his voice gruffer than he intended. He turned to a wooden chest in the corner, the one that held his late wife's things. He hadn't opened it in 3 years. His hands hesitated over the lid. It felt like a betrayal, but letting this woman freeze was not an option. He pulled out a simple cotton dress and a wool shawl. "You can change behind that blanket," he said, nodding to a partition he'd hung for privacy. "I'll make us some coffee." He tried to focus on grinding the beans, on the familiar ritual of preparing the pot, but he was acutely aware of every sound coming from behind the blanket, the rustle of wet silk, the soft sigh as it fell to the floor, the whisper of new fabric against skin. It was driving him mad. "Mr. McCarthy?" Her voice was small, hesitant. He gritted his teeth. "Sam, just Sam." "Sam," she repeated. I, I can't manage these buttons. My fingers are too cold. They're shaking." His heart hammered against his ribs. A simple request, an innocent one. But it felt like a test, a trap. "Molly can help you," he said, his voice tight. "She's fallen asleep by the fire," Kate replied softly. He was out of excuses. He turned slowly, and his breath caught in his throat. She stood there, half hidden by the blanket, wearing his dead wife's dress. The simple garment, which had looked so modest on Mary, was transformed on Kate's frame. It clung to her curves, the fabric straining at the seams. The back was open, a long line of pale, perfect skin exposed to the firelight, all the way down to the subtle curve of her spine. He felt like a trespasser in his own home. "Please," she whispered. He moved toward her like a man walking to the gallows. His hands, usually so steady, trembled as he fumbled with the tiny pearl buttons. Each brush of his knuckles against her skin was like a jolt of lightning. He could feel the warmth of her, smell the scent of her rain-washed hair. He was so close he could see the tiny, frantic pulse beating in the hollow of her throat. When the last button was fastened, he didn't step away. He couldn't. She turned to face him, her eyes dark and deep in the flickering light. They were standing so close their breath mingled in the cold air. The air crackled with a tension so thick he could taste it. It was wrong. Every part of it was wrong. She was a lie wrapped in a riddle, and he was a man who'd sworn off complications. But as he looked into her eyes, he knew he was already in too deep. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one she had brought inside his cabin. And just as he was about to do something he would definitely regret, a sharp, frantic barking erupted from outside. It wasn't his dog. Kate's head whipped toward the door, her face draining of all color. The look on her face wasn't fear. It was pure, undiluted terror. "They found me," she breathed, and her voice was the sound of hope dying. "Get down," Sam hissed, his hand instinctively going to the Colt on his hip. He shoved Kate behind him and grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace, his mind racing. Who was they? The bandits she'd mentioned? If so, why would they track a single survivor through a storm like this? He crept to the small window, peering through a crack in the shutter. The wind was still howling, whipping snow and sand into a frenzy. Through the chaos, he could make out two figures on horseback, vague shapes huddled against the storm. They weren't acting like bandits. Bandits would be loud, aggressive, trying to kick the door in. These men were quiet, patient, like wolves waiting for their prey to make a mistake. The barking grew more intense. It was a hunting dog, trained and relentless. It had picked up her scent. "Who are they, Kate?" he demanded in a low, urgent whisper. "The truth. Now." She was shaking, her eyes glued to the door as if she could see right through the thick wood. My fiancé's men," she stammered. "He sent them to bring me back." Sam's world tilted. Fiancé? This story was getting more complicated by the second. "You ran away from a wedding?" he scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping him. "All this for a case of cold feet?" "You don't understand," she shot back, her fear giving way to a spark of anger. "He's not a good man. The life he wanted for me." It wasn't a life. It was a cage. A gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. The barking stopped abruptly. A sickening yelp cut through the wind, then silence. The men outside had killed the dog. Cold. Efficient. These weren't just some cowboys hired to track down a runaway bride. These were professionals. Sam's blood ran cold. This was more than a domestic dispute. He'd seen men like this before. In a different life he tried hard to forget. Men who operated outside the law, who did the dirty work for powerful people. "Molly," he whispered, his heart seizing with fear. He glanced over at his daughter, still sleeping soundly on her cot, oblivious to the danger that had just landed on their doorstep. A wave of protective fury washed over him. He had brought this into her home. "Stay here, don't make a sound," he ordered Kate. He grabbed his rifle from the rack above the mantel, the cold weight of the steel a familiar comfort in his hands. He checked the load. 6 shots. He had another box of cartridges in the pantry. Not nearly enough. A heavy fist pounded on the door. Once, twice. The sound was like a death knell. "Sam McCarthy," a voice called out, surprisingly clear over the storm. "We know you're in there. We know the woman is with you. We tracked her horse. Send her out and we'll be on our way. No trouble for you or the girl." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Men like that didn't leave witnesses. Sam's mind was a whirlwind. He was just a rancher, a widower trying to get by. But he was also a man who didn't back down from a fight, especially not when his child was in the crossfire. He looked at Kate, who was huddled by the fire, clutching her mysterious box, her face a mask of despair. He looked at Molly, his innocent, sleeping daughter. And he made a choice. "Get Molly," he whispered to Kate. "Take her to the root cellar. The entrance is under the rug. Stay there. Do not come out no matter what you hear. Do you understand?" Kate stared at him, her eyes wide with a new kind of fear. This wasn't about her anymore. She nodded, her movements quick and silent. She scooped up the sleeping child, who stirred but didn't wake, and carried her towards a small bearskin rug in the center of the room. Sam moved to the door, his rifle held ready. "This is private property," he yelled, pitching his voice to sound steady, unafraid. "You've got no business here. Move on before you get hurt." A low chuckle answered him. "Brave words, rancher, but you're outnumbered. It doesn't have to get bloody. We just want the girl and the package she's carrying." The package, the box. So that's what this was really about. Not a runaway bride. It was about what was in that locked chest. What kind of secret was worth killing for? He heard the trap door to the cellar creak open and shut behind him. Good. They were safe. Now it was just him and them. The odds were bad. 2 against 1, maybe more he couldn't see. They were armed, professional, and had the advantage of surprise. His cabin, once his fortress, now felt like a trap. He had one advantage. They didn't know who he was. They thought he was just some dumb farmer who'd stumbled into their path. They didn't know about his past. They didn't know he was more dangerous than they could possibly imagine. "Last chance, McCarthy," the voice boomed. Sam took a deep breath, the smell of gunpowder and pine filling his lungs. He pressed his back against the rough-hewn wood of the door, the rifle stock cool against his cheek. He wasn't a rancher anymore. He was something else, something he had buried a long time ago. He didn't answer them with words. He answered with a bullet. He fired straight through the wooden door, aiming for where he judged the man's chest to be. A choked scream, a heavy thud, and then a torrent of curses from the second man confirmed his aim was true. The quiet night exploded into chaos. Gunshots ripped through the thin walls of the cabin, splinters of wood flying like shrapnel. Glass shattered. The lamp on the table exploded, plunging the room into near darkness, lit only by the flickering fire and the muzzle flashes from outside. Sam dropped to the floor, rolling behind an overturned table, his mind instantly shifting into a cold, calculated state of survival. He was no longer Sam McCarthy, the grieving father. He was Sergeant McCarthy of the 3rd Cavalry, the man they used to send in when things went sideways. And things had just gone very, very sideways. The world was a symphony of destruction. Bullets tore through the walls, ripping apart the simple life Sam had built. They punched holes in the flour sacks, shattered the crockery Mary had painted by hand, and gouged deep scars into the wooden table he'd made for Molly's 5th birthday. Each shot felt like a personal violation. He stayed low, crawling on his belly toward the pantry. He needed more ammunition, and he needed a better position. The front of the cabin was a death trap. The remaining man outside was smart, moving, changing his angle of attack. Sam could hear his boots crunching in the snow, first on the left, then on the right. He was trying to get a clear shot through a window. Sam reached the pantry, the air thick with the smell of spilled grain and gunpowder. His hands found the familiar cardboard box of cartridges. He reloaded the rifle with practiced, mechanical efficiency, his fingers moving without thought. He shoved a handful of extra rounds into his pocket. Then he did something they wouldn't expect. Instead of hunkering down for a siege, he went on the offensive. He scrambled to the back of the cabin, to the small shuttered window over the dry sink. It was a risk. The man could be waiting there, but staying put was a death sentence. He took a deep breath, counted to 3, and kicked the shutter open with his boot, rolling to the side as he did. A gunshot immediately blasted through the opening, burying itself in the wall where his head had been moments before. The man was fast, but Sam was faster. Before the shooter could fire again, Sam thrust his rifle through the window and squeezed the trigger, not aiming at the man, but at the lantern hanging from the porch eave. The glass exploded, plunging the area outside into total darkness. The man cursed, his only light source gone. Advantage, McCarthy. Now they were both blind, but Sam knew the layout of his land. Every rock, every tree, every dip in the ground. This was his home field. He slipped out the back window like a wraith, melting into the howling storm. The cold was a physical shock, the wind tearing at him, but his mind was on fire. He circled around the cabin, moving silently through the scrub oak, his rifle held at the ready. He could hear the man, disoriented, calling out for his partner. He was an amateur relying on intimidation and superior firepower. He wasn't a hunter. Sam was. He found the first man lying in the snow near the front porch, a dark stain spreading across his chest. Dead. Sam felt nothing. No remorse, no satisfaction. Just a cold, hard knot in his stomach. He knelt and quickly searched the body. He found a wallet with a wad of cash and a letter. The letterhead was from the Vanderbilt Rail Corporation. Vanderbilt, the same name as Kate's supposed last name in the wanted poster he'd seen from the Pinkerton. But this man wasn't a Pinkerton. He was a hired gun. He heard a noise to his right, a twig snapping. The second man was close. Sam froze, becoming part of the landscape. He held his breath, listening. The man was breathing hard, panicked. He'd lost control of the situation. "Come on out, rancher!" the man shouted, his voice tight with fear. "Let's just talk this over." Sam smiled grimly in the dark. The time for talking was over. He raised his rifle, sighting down the barrel toward the sound. He saw a shape move against the snow, a silhouette. He had a clear shot. His finger tightened on the trigger. But then a terrible thought struck him, a thought that made his blood run colder than the winter wind. Molly, Kate, the root cellar. The trap door was inside the cabin. What if the man doubled back? What if he realized Sam was outside and decided to go for the leverage inside? He had to end this, now. He stepped out from behind the rock. "Looking for me?" he called out. The man spun around, startled, and fired wildly. The bullet whizzed past Sam's ear, but the muzzle flash gave away his exact position. It was the last mistake he would ever make. Sam's rifle bucked against his shoulder. The shot echoed through the valley, a single final punctuation mark to the violence. The man crumpled to the ground without a sound. Silence descended. All he could hear was the wind and the frantic pounding of his own heart. It was over. He stood there for a long moment, the rifle smoke mingling with his breath in the frigid air. The man he used to be, the soldier, slowly receded, leaving behind the father, the rancher. And the father was terrified. He ran back to the cabin, his boots slipping in the blood-stained snow. He threw open the door. The inside was a wreck, a ghost of the warm, safe home it had been just an hour ago. "Kate!" he yelled, his voice cracking. "It's over! You can come out!" He tore the rug aside and threw open the heavy wooden door to the cellar. He peered down into the darkness, his heart in his throat. "Kate?" A faint light flickered below. He saw Kate's face, pale and tear-streaked, looking up at him. Molly was huddled behind her, awake now, her eyes wide with fear. But that's not what made Sam's stomach drop. Standing behind them, in the cramped, dusty confines of the cellar, was a third person, a man. He was tall, dressed in a fine city suit, and he held a small silver derringer pressed firmly against Kate's temple. It was the Pinkerton, Detective James Porter. "Drop the rifle, Mr. McCarthy," Porter said, his voice calm and steady, a chilling contrast to the chaos that had just unfolded. "Or the lady gets a third eye." Sam stared, his mind struggling to process the scene. Porter hadn't come for Kate. He hadn't been working for her father. He had been working with these men. He'd been in the house, or nearby, waiting for his moment. And while Sam had been outside fighting for their lives, the real viper had already been in the nest. The rifle felt impossibly heavy in Sam's hands. He was caught, completely and utterly caught. The fight outside had drained him, and now he was facing an enemy who had played him for a fool from the very beginning. Porter's calm, smug face was illuminated by the single candle Kate held, her hand trembling so badly the flame danced and threw wild shadows across the cellar walls. "I said, drop it," Porter repeated, his voice losing some of its silky smoothness, replaced by a raw, impatient edge. He pressed the barrel of the derringer harder against Kate's skin. She flinched, a silent tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. Sam's gaze flickered to Molly, who was frozen behind Kate, her small hands clenched into fists. Her eyes, so much like her mother's, were locked on his, filled with a terrifying mix of fear and confusion. She didn't understand what was happening, but she knew it was bad. She knew the man holding the gun to Kate's head was the reason her world had been turned upside down. He couldn't risk it. Not with Molly watching. Not with Kate's life on the line. Slowly, agonizingly, he lowered the rifle and let it clatter to the wooden floor. The sound was like a final surrender. "Good boy," Porter sneered. "Now kick it over here. And the sidearm, too." Sam did as he was told, his mind racing, searching for an out, any possible angle. There was none. Porter held all the cards. "How?" Sam asked, his voice a low growl. "How did you get in here?" Porter chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Your front door has a few new holes in it, courtesy of my late, incompetent associates. While you were out playing soldier in the snow, I simply let myself in. I must say, I'm impressed, McCarthy. You're more than just a dirt-scrabbling rancher, aren't you? There's a story there. A shame I won't be around to hear it." He gestured with his head toward the leather-bound box, which was sitting on a crate of potatoes in the corner of the cellar. "The box, Miss Vanderbilt. Bring it to me." And no sudden moves. Kate's eyes met Sam's for a split second. A silent question passed between them. A desperate plea. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Don't fight him. Not yet." With trembling hands, Kate picked up the box and slowly walked toward Porter. He snatched it from her, never taking his eyes off Sam. He tucked the box under one arm, his other hand still holding the gun steady on Kate. "What's in it?" Sam demanded. "What's so important that you'd kill all these people for it?" "It's not what's in it, Mr. McCarthy," Porter said, his eyes glinting with greed. "It's what it represents. Leverage, power. A very, very comfortable retirement for me." He backed toward the cellar steps, pulling Kate with him as a human shield. "You see, Miss Vanderbilt's fiancé, Lord Peaton, and her dear old father have been creative in their business dealings. This little box contains the proof. Ledgers, contracts, deeds. Enough to send them both to prison for a very long time. They want it back. Badly." It all clicked into place. The lies, the desperation, the professional killers. Kate hadn't just been running from an unwanted marriage. She had been running with the evidence of a massive criminal conspiracy. "And you were hired to get it back," Sam said. Porter laughed again. "I was. But plans change. A man with this kind of information can write his own ticket. Why take a paycheck from Lord Peaton when I can bleed him dry for the rest of his life?" He was at the top of the stairs now, starting to pull Kate up into the ruined cabin. "You won't get away with this," Kate said, her voice shaking but defiant. "Oh, I think I will," Porter replied. "I'll be a ghost. You three, on the other hand." A tragic story. A rancher and his daughter, caught in the crossfire when the runaway heiress he was harboring was tracked down by her fiancé's men. A terrible fire. Everyone perished. It's quite poetic, really. Fire. The word hung in the air, cold and deadly. He was going to kill them and burn the cabin down, destroying all the evidence. As Porter dragged Kate out of the cellar, Molly finally broke. With a terrified cry, she lunged forward and grabbed onto Kate's leg. "Don't take her!" The sudden movement startled Porter. For a fraction of a second, his attention was diverted. His gun wavered. It was the only chance Sam was going to get. He moved. Not like a rancher, but like the cavalry sergeant he once was. He launched himself up the stairs in a blur of motion. He didn't go for the gun. He went for the box. He slammed his shoulder into Porter's side, ignoring the searing pain as the Derringer went off next to his ear, the shot going wild and burying itself in the ceiling. His hands closed around the leather-bound trunk. He wrenched it free from Porter's grasp, just as the detective's boot caught him in the ribs, sending him stumbling backward. Sam fell back down the cellar steps, clutching the precious box the wind knocked out of him. Above him, Porter snarled in fury. He had lost the prize. He raised the Derringer, aiming it down into the darkness of the cellar, straight at Sam. But he had forgotten about Kate. She wasn't a damsel in distress anymore. She was a cornered animal fighting for her life, and for the lives of the only people who had shown her kindness. With a scream of rage, she grabbed a heavy iron skillet from the hearth and swung it with all her might. The pan connected with the back of Porter's head with a sickening crack. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he crumpled to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut, landing in a heap at the top of the cellar stairs. Silence. Heavy, ragged breathing filled the small space. Sam, Kate, and Molly stared at the unconscious form of the man who had almost destroyed them. But they weren't safe yet. Sam could smell it. Smoke. He looked up through the open trapdoor. A small flicker of orange was licking at the edge of the shattered window frame where the lamp had been. Porter, or one of his men, had started the fire. The wind, which had been their enemy all night, was now fanning the flames, whipping them into a frenzy. The cabin was turning into an inferno, and they were trapped in the cellar beneath it. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to overwhelm him. The smell of burning pine was getting stronger, thicker. Black smoke began to curl down the cellar steps like a malevolent serpent. Above them, the crackle of the fire grew into a hungry roar. The floorboards, the very ceiling of their refuge, were heating up. "We have to get out of here," Kate coughed, her eyes streaming from the smoke. She pulled Molly close, shielding the child's face with her body. Sam's mind, honed by years of life-or-death situations, kicked into gear. The main exit was blocked by fire and an unconscious, heavily armed man. There had to be another way. His eyes scanned the cramped, dark cellar. Crates of preserves, sacks of potatoes, old tools. And there, in the far corner, half hidden behind a stack of firewood, was a small, square patch of wall that looked different from the rest. The foundation stones were newer, the mortar less weathered. It was a patch he'd made himself years ago. The cold storage tunnel, he breathed. It wasn't much, just a narrow burrow dug into the hillside behind the cabin, used for keeping vegetables from freezing in the deep winter. It was small, cramped, and probably full of spiders, but it led outside. It led to life. "Help me with this!" he yelled over the growing roar of the fire. He scrambled to the corner and started tearing away the firewood. Kate was right behind him, her city-soft hands grabbing splintered logs and tossing them aside. The heat was becoming unbearable. The air was thin, tasting of ash and death. Molly was coughing, her small body shaking with terror. They cleared the wood, revealing the stone patch. Sam grabbed a rusty pickaxe from the wall. "Stand back," he ordered. He swung the heavy tool with all his strength. The first blow sent spiderwebs of cracks through the mortar. The second shattered a stone. Hope, fierce and desperate, surged through him. Above them, a heavy beam groaned, and then crashed down in the main room, sending a shower of sparks and burning embers down the cellar stairs. The fire was eating the cabin alive. They were running out of time. Swing after swing, Sam hammered at the wall. His muscles screamed in protest, his lungs burned, but he didn't stop. Kate worked beside him, pulling away the loosened stones, her torn dress and bruised hands a testament to her newfound grit. She was no longer Catherine Vanderbilt, the society heiress. She was a survivor. Finally a hole, small at first, but big enough to feel a draft of clean, cold air. It was the most beautiful thing Sam had ever felt. "It's through," he gasped. He worked frantically, widening the hole. "Molly, you first!" Kate pushed the terrified child toward the opening. "Go, sweetheart. Crawl to the light. We're right behind you." Molly scrambled through the narrow gap and disappeared into the darkness of the tunnel. "You next, Kate," Sam said, his voice raw. "Not without the box," she said, her jaw set with a stubbornness that amazed him. She snatched the leather trunk from the floor. "Damn it, Kate, there's no time." "This is why those men died," she shot back. "It's why he tried to kill us. I'm not leaving it." There was no time to argue. He boosted her up and she wriggled through the hole, dragging the heavy box with her. Sam took one last look at the cellar. The stairs were gone, consumed by a sheet of flame. The unconscious form of Detective Porter was now completely hidden by smoke and fire. Justice, frontier style, had been served. He dove through the hole just as the main floor of the cabin collapsed into the cellar in a deafening, fiery explosion. The force of it propelled him through the tunnel, the air sucked from his lungs. He crawled on his hands and knees, choking and blind, following the sound of Kate calling his name. He tumbled out of the tunnel's far end, landing in a snowbank, gasping the clean, frigid night air. He was alive. They were all alive. He looked up. His home, his fortress, the place where he had brought his bride and raised his child, was a pillar of fire against the dark sky. Everything was gone. The bed he'd built, the chairs they'd sat on, Molly's toys, Mary's letters, all of it turning to ash. He felt a hand on his shoulder. Kate stood beside him, her face smudged with soot, her eyes reflecting the terrible beauty of the flames. Molly was clinging to her, sobbing quietly. They had nothing left but the clothes on their backs, a box full of dangerous secrets, and each other. "What do we do now, Sam?" Kate whispered, her voice raw with exhaustion and grief. Sam looked at the inferno that had once been his life. He looked at the determined, terrified woman beside him. He looked at his precious daughter. He felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. The past was gone, burned away. All that mattered was the future. "Now," he said, his voice filled with a grim resolve he hadn't felt in years, "we fight back." He didn't know how. They were alone on foot in the middle of a winter storm with powerful men who wanted them dead. The odds were impossible, but looking at Kate, who had faced down killers and fires to protect not just her secrets, but his daughter, he knew he wasn't alone. The rancher was gone. The widower was gone. The man who hid from the world was gone. All that was left was the soldier, and the soldier had a new mission: protect his family, and make the people who did this pay, no matter what it cost. The dawn broke gray and unforgiving, painting the smoldering ruins of the cabin in shades of ash and sorrow. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world draped in a clean, white blanket of snow that couldn't hide the ugliness of what had happened. They had survived the night huddled in a small rocky alcove, sharing what little body heat they had, the precious box nestled between them. Sam felt a hollowness inside him that had nothing to do with hunger. He had lost his home, his sanctuary, but as he watched Molly sleeping, her head in Kate's lap, he knew he hadn't lost what was truly important. Kate was awake, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She looked exhausted, broken, yet there was a fire in her gaze he hadn't seen before. The pampered society girl was gone, burned away with the cabin. In her place was a woman made of steel. "They'll send more men," she said, her voice a dry rasp. "My father, my fiancé, Lord Peaton. They won't stop until they have this box and I'm either back under their control or silenced for good." "Let 'em come," Sam said, the words tasting like gravel. He was running on pure adrenaline and a stubborn refusal to be beaten. He'd spent years running from his past, trying to build a quiet life. They had come to his home and destroyed it. They had threatened his child. There was no more running. He stood up, his body aching from the fight in the cold. "We need a plan. We need horses, supplies, and a place to go where they won't find us." "There's a town," Kate said, 3 days' ride south of here, or so the maps on the wagon train showed. "It's called Redemption. It's on a different rail line, one that isn't owned by my father." Redemption. The name felt like a cruel joke, but it was a destination, a goal. "We can't walk for 3 days, not with Molly," Sam said. He scanned the landscape. His horse, Diablo, was gone, likely scared off by the fire. The other horses were dead or had bolted, but the 2 killers Porter had brought with him, their horses might still be nearby. "Stay here, keep Molly warm. I'm going to see what I can salvage," he told Kate. He made his way back to the clearing, the scene of the gunfight. The bodies were still there, half covered in new snow. He felt a grim satisfaction seeing them. He ignored them and followed the tracks. Luck for the first time in a long while was on their side. He found their horses tethered in a small grove of trees where the men had left them to keep them hidden. He also found their saddlebags. Inside was dried jerky, a skin of water, a few extra boxes of ammunition for a pistol he now owned, and tucked in a leather pouch, a thick roll of money. More cash than he'd seen in a year. Blood money. He didn't hesitate to take it. They would need every dollar. When he returned to the alcove leading 2 sturdy horses, the look of relief on Kate's face was worth more than all the money in the world. "We ride south," he said, helping her mount one of the horses and handing the sleeping Molly up to her. "We move fast, and we don't look back." The journey was brutal. The cold was relentless, and the landscape was a vast, unforgiving expanse of white and gray. They rode hard, stopping only for brief moments to rest the horses and chew on the tough, salty jerky. Sam pushed them relentlessly, his eyes constantly scanning their back trail, expecting to see the dust cloud of riders at any moment. During the day, they rode in silence, lost in their own thoughts. But at night, huddled around a small smokeless fire, they talked. Kate told him everything. She told him about her father, Reginald Vanderbilt, a man who saw his daughter as a business asset. She told him about her fiancé, Lord Alistair Peaton, a charismatic English nobleman with a cruel streak and a mountain of debt. The marriage was a merger, a deal to combine Vanderbilt's American industrial power with Peaton's European titles and access. The box, she explained, was her escape plan. Her father's chief accountant, a man with a conscience, had seen the rot at the heart of the Vanderbilt-Peaton dealings. They weren't just building railroads, they were destroying lives. They were using fraudulent deeds and intimidation to drive ranchers and homesteaders off their land, buying it for pennies on the dollar before the new rail line went through, and then selling it for a fortune. The ledgers in the box proved it all. He gave them to me before he disappeared, Kate said, her voice trembling. He told me to run, to get them to the newspapers, to a lawman who couldn't be bought. He said it was the only way to stop them. Sam listened, a cold fury building in his gut. These were the men who held the mortgages on ranches like his. They were the reason good people struggled while the rich got richer. This wasn't just Kate's fight anymore. It was his. They had burned down his home, but they represented the very forces that had been squeezing the life out of his world for years. There's a man I used to know, Sam said slowly, the words feeling strange on his tongue. A U.S. Marshal. His name is Jedediah Kane. We served together. If anyone is stubborn enough and honest enough to take on men like Vanderbilt, it's him. Last I heard, he was based out of the federal courthouse in Denver. Denver. It was a long way off. But for the first time, they had more than just a direction. They had a destination. They had a sliver of hope. On the third day, they saw it. The town of Redemption. It wasn't much, just a handful of rough buildings, huddled against the cold. But to them, it looked like paradise. It meant a warm bed, a hot meal, and a chance to rest. As they rode down the muddy main street, Sam felt a sense of unease. The town was too quiet. Men on the boardwalk stopped talking as they passed, their eyes following them with a cold, unwelcoming curiosity. These weren't the friendly, hard-working folks of his own town. There was something hard and watchful about them. They stopped in front of the only hotel, a two-story clapboard building with a sign that read, "The Last Chance Inn." "Let's get a room, get cleaned up," Sam said. "We'll buy some real food and supplies, and then we plan our route to Denver." He helped Kate and Molly down, keeping the precious box slung over his own shoulder. As they stepped onto the boardwalk, the saloon doors across the street swung open. A man stepped out, a silver star pinned to his vest. He was big, with a drooping mustache and mean, piggy eyes. "That's far enough, strangers," the sheriff said, his voice a low growl. His hand was resting casually on the butt of his pistol. Sam's hand instinctively moved toward his own gun. "We're just passing through, Sheriff, looking for a room for the night." The sheriff spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "I'm afraid all our rooms are full, especially for folks like you." He jerked his chin toward a piece of paper nailed to the telegraph pole. Sam's blood turned to ice. It was a wanted poster. 2 of them. One had a drawing of Kate's face. The text read, "Wanted Catherine Vanderbilt for theft and questioning in the disappearance of a company accountant. $5,000 reward." The other poster was newer. The drawing was rough but unmistakable. It was his face. It read, "Wanted Sam McCarthy for murder, arson, and the kidnapping of Catherine Vanderbilt. $10,000 reward, dead or alive." They hadn't just sent men after them. They had turned the entire territory against them. They weren't fugitives running from assassins anymore. They were outlaws, and they had just walked right into the lion's den. The air on Redemption's main street grew thick and heavy. The silence was broken only by the whistling wind and the creak of a swinging sign. Every eye was on them. Sam could feel the greed and suspicion radiating from the onlookers. $10,000 was a fortune. It was enough to make an honest man turn crooked, and this town didn't look like it was overflowing with honest men. The sheriff took a step forward, his hand now gripping the handle of his gun. That's a lot of money for one man, McCarthy. Or should I say, kidnapper? I haven't kidnapped anyone, Sam said, his voice low and steady. He gently pushed Kate and Molly behind him, shielding them with his body. And the only men I killed were the ones who burned down my home and tried to murder my daughter. A likely story, the sheriff sneered, but his eyes flickered toward the box on Sam's shoulder. He knew. He had clearly been given instructions. He wasn't just a local lawman looking to collect a bounty. He was on the payroll. We don't want any trouble, Sheriff, Sam said, trying to de-escalate. We'll just be on our way. Oh, I don't think so, the sheriff said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. He drew his gun. You're coming with me. The girl, too. There's a man on the afternoon train who's very eager to see her. The afternoon train. They had been anticipated. This town wasn't a random stop. It was a trap, laid out for them by Vanderbilt and Peaton. Sam's mind raced. He was outgunned. The sheriff, plus at least half a dozen men on the street, who were now looking more like a lynch mob than curious townsfolk. A shootout was suicide, but surrender was a death sentence, not just for him, but for Kate and Molly too. That's when Kate did something extraordinary. She stepped out from behind Sam, her chin held high. She looked directly at the sheriff, her voice ringing with an authority that was utterly at odds with her disheveled appearance. Sheriff, she said, her tone as cold and sharp as ice. My name is Catherine Vanderbilt. My father is Reginald Vanderbilt, owner of the Vanderbilt Rail Corporation. The man you're about to be speaking with on that train. The sheriff faltered, surprised by her sudden boldness. I know who you are, girl. Then you know, she continued, pressing the advantage, that my father is a man who values loyalty, but he values results more. He offered you a sum of money to apprehend us, did he not? He did, the sheriff admitted, his eyes narrowing. I will double it, Kate said, the words hanging in the frigid air. A murmur went through the crowd. The sheriff stared at her, dumbfounded. You don't have that kind of money, he scoffed. Don't I? Kate replied, a faint, confident smile playing on her lips. She gestured to the box. This trunk contains ledgers and contracts detailing certain irregularities in my father's business practices. Information that a rival corporation, say the Union Pacific, would pay a king's ransom for. Or information that a jury would find very, very interesting. Now, I'm sure you're a smart man, Sheriff. You understand the concept of leverage. I will write you a bank draft right here, right now, for twice what my father offered. All you have to do is turn a blind eye and let us leave on our horses. It was an audacious bluff. Brilliant. She was using their greatest weakness, the box, as their greatest strength. She was fighting fire with fire, greed with greed. The sheriff hesitated. Sam could see the conflict in his eyes. The promise of double the money was tempting, but betraying a man like Reginald Vanderbilt was a dangerous game. How do I know your draft is any good? He asked, stalling for time. You don't, Kate said smoothly. But you also don't know if my father will even pay you, once he has what he wants. He's not known for his generosity to loose ends. I, on the other hand, need to ensure your silence. It's in my best interest to pay you handsomely. The logic was sound. The sheriff was wavering. Sam could feel the tension on the street shift. The men were no longer looking at him as a target, but at the sheriff, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. But before the sheriff could make his decision, the shrill whistle of a train echoed from down the tracks. It was arriving early. Panic flashed in the sheriff's eyes. His window for decision-making had just slammed shut. He made his choice. Nice try, girl, he snarled, raising his pistol. But I think I'll stick with the devil I know. He aimed his gun not at Sam, but at Kate. But he had underestimated Sam McCarthy. The moment the train whistle blew, Sam knew the negotiation was over. While all eyes were on Kate, he had been slowly, imperceptibly, moving his hand closer to his gun. He wasn't the fastest draw in the West, but he was smart. He didn't draw on the sheriff. He drew on the rope holding up the massive wooden sign for the last chance in, right above the sheriff's head. His shot rang out, a deafening crack in the tense silence. The rope snapped. The heavy sign, 200 pounds of solid oak, swung down like a guillotine. The sheriff looked up. his eyes wide with disbelief, just as the sign crashed down on him. He crumpled to the ground in a heap, out cold. All hell broke loose. The deputized townsfolk, shocked into action, started firing. Sam grabbed Kate and Molly, shoving them toward the horses. "Go, ride!" he yelled. He provided cover fire, firing shots into the dirt in front of the men, forcing them to dive for cover. He wasn't trying to kill them. He was just buying time. He vaulted onto his horse as a bullet whizzed past his head and kicked the animal into a gallop. They thundered out of town, a hail of bullets chasing them. They were alive. They were free. But as they crested the hill and looked back, they saw the train pulling into the station. Figures in dark coats were already disembarking onto the platform. They had escaped the trap, but the hunters were now here in person, and they would be faster, better equipped, and far more ruthless than a small-town sheriff. The chase was on. They rode until the horses were lathered and foaming, until the sun began to dip below the jagged peaks of the distant mountains. Sam didn't stop, didn't dare to even look back. He pushed them onward, deeper into the wilderness, trading the open plains for the treacherous, wooded terrain of the foothills. It was harder going, but it offered more cover. They finally made camp in a hidden ravine, so narrow and deep that Sam doubted anyone could find them by chance. A small stream offered water for them and the horses. They were exhausted, bone-weary, but the adrenaline from their escape still coursed through their veins. Molly had been terrified but silent during the chase. Now, huddled by the small fires Sam had managed to build, the fear finally caught up with her. She began to cry, quiet, hiccuping sobs that tore at Sam's heart. "It's okay, sweet pea," he murmured, pulling her into a tight embrace. "It's okay. Daddy's here." Kate knelt beside them, her face etched with guilt. "This is my fault," she whispered. "I've brought all this on you. On her." "No," Sam said, his voice firm. He looked at her, his eyes meeting hers over Molly's head. "This isn't your fault. This is the fault of greedy, evil men. You chose to stand up to them. That's not a crime. That's courage." His words seemed to steady her. She reached out and placed her hand on Molly's back, rubbing gentle circles. "He's right, Molly. We're going to be okay. Sam is going to protect us, and I'm going to help him." Molly's sobs subsided into sniffles. The three of them sat there for a long time, a strange, battered little family, finding comfort in each other's presence against the vast, lonely darkness of the frontier. Later, after Molly had fallen asleep wrapped in a saddle blanket, Sam and Kate sat staring into the fire. "That was a bold move back in town," Sam said, breaking the silence, "offering to double the bribe. Where did you learn to bluff like that?" A wry smile touched Kate's lips. "I spent years watching my father and his associates negotiate deals in smoke-filled rooms. I learned that every man has a price. Their only mistake was thinking that I have one too." Sam nodded, a new respect for her blooming in his chest. "But they know we're heading for Denver now. They'll have men on every road, watching every train." "Then we don't take the roads," Kate said, her eyes gleaming with a fierce intelligence. "We do what they don't expect. We go over the mountains." Sam stared at her. "Over the mountains? In the middle of winter? That's suicide, Kate. The passes are snowed in. It's treacherous." "It's also the one place they won't be looking for us," she countered. "They think I'm a fragile city girl. They think you're a simple rancher. They'll expect us to take the easiest path. We need to do the hardest thing possible." He knew she was right. It was a desperate gamble, but their situation was desperate. Staying on the low ground meant getting caught. The mountains offered a chance, however slim. "There's an old miner's trail," he said, thinking back to maps he'd studied years ago. "It's dangerous, barely a path, but it could lead us over the divide. It'll be slow. We'll have to abandon the horses at some point." "Then that's what we do," she said, her voice resolute. He looked at her, truly looked at her. The woman who had stumbled out of a storm in a silk dress was gone. This woman with soot on her face and determination in her eyes was a stranger, and he found himself drawn to this stranger in a way that both thrilled and terrified him. "You're not like any woman I've ever met, Catherine Vanderbilt," he said softly. "You're not what I expected either, Sam McCarthy," she replied, her gaze warm. A moment of quiet understanding passed between them. In the midst of chaos and fear, something new and fragile was beginning to grow. The next morning they began their ascent. The air grew thinner, colder. The world became a vertical landscape of rock, snow, and sky. The horses struggled, and soon, as Sam had predicted, the path became too narrow and steep for them to continue. Saying goodbye to the animals felt like cutting off a lifeline. Now they were truly on their own, proceeding on foot, carrying what little they had on their backs. Sam carried Molly for long stretches, her small body a precious weight against his chest. Kate, refusing to be a burden, carried their supplies in the heavy, all-important box. Days blurred into a grueling routine of climbing, shivering, and surviving. They faced blizzards that reduced visibility to zero and navigated ledges so narrow that a single misstep meant a fatal fall. But they pressed on, driven by the knowledge of what was behind them and the faint hope of what lay ahead. It was during this ordeal that Sam saw the true depth of Kate's strength. She never complained. When he stumbled, she helped him up. When Molly's spirits flagged, Kate would tell her stories of faraway places, her voice a soothing balm against the harsh reality of their journey. One evening, as they sheltered in a shallow cave from a biting wind, Sam was cleaning his new pistol by the light of their small fire. Molly was asleep. "Where did you learn to handle a gun like that?" Kate asked quietly. "And to fight the way you did at the cabin? You told Porter you were a rancher. That wasn't the whole truth, was it?" Sam stopped what he was doing, the metallic click of the gun echoing in the small space. He had been waiting for this question. He sighed, a plume of white vapor in the frigid air. "No," he said, "it wasn't. Before I was a rancher, before I met Mary, I was a soldier. 3rd Cavalry, fought in the war. After that, I did some work for the government, tracking down fugitives, going places other people wouldn't. I did things I'm not proud of. I came out here to forget all that, to be a different man." "You are a different man," Kate said softly. "You're a good man, Sam. A good father. Those men, my past, it found me anyway," he said bitterly. "It followed me to my home and burned it to the ground." "It didn't find you," she said, moving closer, her shoulder brushing against his. "You chose to help me. You chose to fight. The man you are now, the rancher and the father, chose to use the skills of the soldier to protect us. You shouldn't be ashamed of that." He looked at her face illuminated by the fire, her eyes full of a deep, unwavering belief in him. In that moment, the loneliness that had been his constant companion for 3 long years began to fade. Before he knew what he was doing, he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a desperate, frantic kiss like the one they'd almost shared in the cabin. This was slow, tender, full of unspoken gratitude and a blossoming affection that defied their desperate circumstances. It was a promise of a future, a quiet moment of warmth in a world of cold. When they pulled apart, the world outside the cave was still a frozen, dangerous wasteland. But inside, for the first time in a very long time, Sam McCarthy felt the stirrings of hope. They were still being hunted. They were still in terrible danger. But they were no longer just running from something. They were running towards something. Together. After what felt like an eternity, they crested the final, windswept peak of the mountain pass. Below them, stretching out as far as the eye could see, was a new valley, a new landscape. They had made it. They had crossed the divide. The descent was easier than the climb, but they were weak with hunger and exhaustion. They stumbled into a small, secluded mining camp, a collection of rough shacks populated by a handful of grizzled old prospectors. These were men who had come to the mountains to escape the world, and they asked no questions. An old-timer named Silas, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, took one look at Molly's pale face and Kate's torn clothes and offered them a share of his stew and the warmth of his hearth without a word. For 2 days they rested, regaining their strength. Sam traded the last of the blood money for an old but sturdy wagon and a pair of mules. It was slow, but it was better than walking. He also bought new, warm clothes for Kate and Molly, and for the first time in weeks, they looked less like fugitives and more like a family of homesteaders. The final leg of their journey to Denver was fraught with a different kind of tension. They were back in civilization, and with that came the risk of being recognized. Sam bought an old wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face, and Kate wore a simple bonnet that hid her distinctive dark hair. They traveled the back roads, avoiding major towns, their hearts pounding every time they passed a stranger on the road. Finally, they saw it in the distance. Denver. It wasn't just a city, it was a symbol. It was the end of the line, the place where they would make their stand. They sold the wagon and mules on the outskirts of town, using the last of their money to rent a small anonymous room in a boarding house on a busy street. The noise of the city, the crowds of people, was a shock after the silence of the wilderness. "I'll go to the federal courthouse alone," Sam said as they huddled in the small room. "It's too dangerous for you to be seen. You and Molly stay here. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me." Kate grabbed his arm, her eyes pleading. "Be careful, Sam." "Always," he said, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. The United States Federal Courthouse was an imposing stone building, a monument to the law and order they so desperately needed. Sam walked up the steps, his stomach in knots. It had been years since he'd seen Jedediah Kane. What if he wasn't here? What if he didn't believe him? He found the marshal's office on the second floor. A stern-faced clerk looked up as he entered. "I need to see Marshal Kane," Sam said. "It's urgent." "The marshal is a busy man," the clerk said dismissively. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Sam said. "But tell him Sam McCarthy is here. He'll see me." The clerk raised a skeptical eyebrow, but disappeared into the back office. A moment later, a towering figure filled the doorway. Jedediah Kane was just as Sam remembered. Tall as an oak tree, with a booming voice and a fierce walrus mustache. His eyes, however, were hard as flint as they took in Sam's worn appearance. "McCarthy," he boomed. "I'll be damned. Last I heard you were raising a family on some forgotten patch of dirt." He stepped forward and then stopped, his eyes narrowing. "Funny thing, though. The Telegraph this morning brought in a new wanted poster. Said a man named Sam McCarthy was a murderer and a kidnapper. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" The air in the room grew cold. Kane wasn't offering a friendly welcome. He was a lawman, and Sam was a wanted man. "Jed, you have to listen to me," Sam said, his voice low and urgent. "It's not what it looks like. I'm being set up. We're being hunted by men working for Reginald Vanderbilt." Kane's expression didn't change. "Vanderbilt's a respectable man, a titan of industry. Why would he be after a broken-down cavalry sergeant?" "Because I'm helping the woman he's trying to silence," Sam said. He stepped forward, placing the leather-bound box on the marshal's desk. "The proof is in here, Jed. Ledgers, deeds, evidence of a criminal conspiracy so vast it could shake this country to its core. Land fraud, intimidation, murder. It's all in there." Marshal Kane stared at the box, then back at Sam. He was silent for a long, agonizing minute. Sam's entire future, Kate's future, Molly's future, all hung on this man's decision. Finally, Kane stroked his mustache. "This is a tall tale, Sam. A man in my position hears a lot of them." He walked over to the door and closed it. He then walked back to his desk, pulled out a key, and unlocked a heavy drawer. He removed a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. He poured 2 shots and pushed one towards Sam. "But I also remember serving with you for 3 years. I know you're not a killer or a kidnapper." He picked up his glass. "And I've never known you to be a liar." Relief washed over Sam so powerfully his knees felt weak. "However," Kane continued, his voice turning grim as he took a sip of whiskey, "you've brought a war to my doorstep. Reginald Vanderbilt is more than just a rich man. He has judges, senators, and lawmen in his pocket. If we open that box, we're not just starting a legal case. We're starting a war against one of the most powerful men in America." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into Sam's. "You need to be sure you're ready for that. Because once we look inside, there's no turning back. For any of us." The choice was clear. Hiding was no longer an option. Running was no longer an option. Sam looked the marshal square in the eye. "Open the box, Jed," he said. "It's time to end this." And with a nod, Marshal Kane took a crowbar from his desk drawer and pried open the lid, unleashing the secrets that would either save them or get them all killed. The contents of the box were even more damning than Kate had described. It wasn't just dry accounting. It was a story of ruthless ambition written in ink and blood. There were two sets of books, the official, pristine ledgers for the public, and the secret ones detailing the bribes, the threats, and the illegal land grabs. There were sworn affidavits from men who had been forced to sell their homes for a pittance. And at the bottom there was a personal journal, written by the accountant who had given Kate the box, detailing a meeting where Lord Peaton had ordered the removal of a stubborn homesteader who wouldn't sell. It was a clear-cut conspiracy. Marshal Kane read through the documents, his face growing darker with every page. "Good God, Sam," he muttered. This is dynamite, enough to bring down an empire." "So you'll help us?" Sam asked. "Help you?" Kane slammed his fist on the desk, making the whiskey bottle jump. "I'm a United States Marshal. It's my sworn duty to uphold the law, no matter how rich or powerful the man who breaks it. We're going to get warrants. We're going to get federal judges involved. We're going to take these bastards down." But he held up a hand. "First things first, we need to secure the star witness. Miss Vanderbilt. Where is she?" "Boarding house on Elm Street," Sam said. "Her and my daughter." "No," Kane said, his face suddenly grim. "That's not secure. Not if Vanderbilt has men in this city. And believe me, he does." He grabbed his hat and gun belt. "You're coming with me. We're moving them somewhere safe. Right now." A cold dread washed over Sam. He had left them alone. He had believed they had finally reached safety. They raced through the streets of Denver, Kane's long strides forcing Sam into a near run. As they turned onto Elm Street, Sam saw it. A fine, expensive carriage was parked in front of the boarding house. Two large, well-dressed men stood guard by the door. Vanderbilt's men. They were too late. "Damn it!" Kane cursed under his breath. "They must have been watching the courthouse." Sam didn't wait for a plan. He saw Molly's face in his mind, and all caution flew out the window. He drew his pistol and started running toward the building. "Sam, wait!" Kane yelled, but it was no use. The men by the door saw him coming. They drew their own weapons, shouting warnings. Sam fired a shot over their heads, sending them scrambling for cover. He kicked open the front door of the boarding house and stormed inside. The landlady was cowering behind her desk, pointing a trembling finger up the stairs. Sam took the stairs two at a time, his heart hammering against his ribs. He heard voices coming from their room. A man's voice, smooth and cultured, with an English accent, and Kate's voice, full of defiance and contempt. He kicked the door to their room open. It flew off its hinges and crashed to the floor. The scene inside made his blood freeze. Molly was huddled in a corner, crying. Kate stood protectively in front of her, and standing in the middle of the room, looking as calm and composed as if he were at a garden party, was a handsome, impeccably dressed man with cold, cruel eyes. He held a small, ornate pistol, and it was pointed directly at Kate's heart. "Ah, the rustic hero arrives," Lord Alistair Peaton said with a thin, unpleasant smile. "A little late for a dramatic rescue, I'm afraid. The lady has already agreed to come with me." "Like hell she has," Sam snarled, his own gun leveled at Peaton's chest. "Stay back, Sam," Kate cried out. "He means it." "Indeed I do," Peaton said, his smile widening. "You see, Mr. McCarthy, you and I have a problem. We both seem to want something that belongs to the other. You have my fiancée, and I have your charming little daughter's future in my hands." He gestured with his head toward Molly. A tragic accident could befall her, a stray illness, a fall down the stairs. It would be a shame. She's a pretty little thing. It was a checkmate, a vile, despicable threat that turned Sam's blood to ice. He could kill Peaton right here, right now. But what would happen to Molly? Vanderbilt's reach was long. Behind him he heard the heavy footsteps of Marshal Kane arriving. "Drop the weapon, Peaton." Kane's voice boomed. "You're surrounded." Peaton chuckled. "Marshal Kane, a pleasure. But I don't think you're in a position to make demands. I will walk out of this building with my fiancée. You will not follow. If you do, or if you attempt to apprehend me, I will send a telegram, and the little girl's life will be forfeit. Do we have an understanding?" Kane and Sam were caught. Peaton had them. He was using Sam's love for his daughter as a weapon. Kate stepped forward, her face a pale, determined mask. "All right, Alistair," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. I'll go with you, on one condition. I'm not in the mood for negotiations, my dear, Peyton said. You will be for this one, she said. You will give me your word as a nobleman that Sam and his daughter will be left unharmed, that you and my father will call off your men and drop all the false charges against him. You get me, and they get to live their lives in peace. That is the deal. Peyton considered it for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. And the box? The ledgers? The marshal has them, Kate said. If any harm comes to Sam or Molly, he has my written instructions to release every last page to every newspaper in the country. Your reputations will be ruined. You will be hounded by the law for the rest of your lives. But if you leave them alone, the box stays sealed. Your secret stays safe. Sam stared at her, his heart breaking. She was sacrificing herself, trading her freedom, her life, for theirs. Kate, no, he whispered. She gave him a look so full of love and regret it stole the breath from his lungs. It's the only way, Sam, she said softly. Then she looked back at Peyton. Do we have a deal? Peyton smiled, a genuine smile of victory this time. He had won. He would get his bride, and his secrets would remain buried. A very clever proposal, my dear. Very well. You have my word. He lowered his pistol and offered Kate his arm. She took it, her shoulders straight, her head held high. She didn't look back at Sam as Peyton led her from the room. Sam could only watch, helpless, as the woman he loved walked away, straight back into the gilded cage she had fought so hard to escape. He had won the battles, but he had just lost the war. The silence in the room after they left was deafening. Molly ran to Sam, burying her face in his legs, her small body racked with sobs. Sam knelt and held her, his own eyes burning with unshed tears of rage and helplessness. He had failed. He had let Kate sacrifice herself to save them. Marshal Kane put a heavy hand on his shoulder. It was the only way, son. She's a brave woman. She bought you your life. And what kind of life is it going to be? Sam asked, his voice raw. Knowing she's with him? Knowing what he'll do to her? We're not done yet, Kane said, his voice a low growl. He gave his word, but he's a man without honor. We just need to be smarter than him. In the days that followed, Sam was a ghost. He and Molly were moved to a safe house, protected by Kane's deputies. The false charges against him were officially dropped, and the wanted posters came down. To the world it was over, but for Sam, it was a living hell. He was free, but he felt more trapped than ever. He thought back to Kate's deal. She had been so specific. If any harm comes to Sam or Molly, the box gets opened. It was a shield. But what if it could be a sword? He went to see Kane. He'll break his word, Jed. You know he will. Men like Peyton and Vanderbilt, they don't leave loose ends. Sooner or later, they'll come for us again, just to be sure. They're just waiting for things to quiet down. I know, Kane admitted. I've got men watching you and the girl around the clock. But my hands are tied. I can't move on them without breaking the deal Miss Vanderbilt made. But what if they break it first? Sam asked, a desperate plan forming in his mind. What if we could bait them? Make them show their hand? The plan was dangerous, reckless even, but it was the only one they had. Kane agreed. They leaked a story to the Denver newspapers, a small, anonymous article about a local rancher who had recently come into a surprising amount of money after his property was destroyed in a fire. The article hinted that the rancher was planning to use the money to buy a large new spread of land, right in the path of Vanderbilt's proposed new railway line. It was a lie, of course. Sam had no money, but Peyton and Vanderbilt wouldn't know that. They would assume Sam had been paid off by a rival, or that he was blackmailing them. He was making himself a problem again, a problem they would feel compelled to solve permanently. They rented a small, isolated farmhouse outside of town, making it look like Sam and Molly had moved in. But it was a trap. Kane's best deputies were hidden in the woods around the property, waiting. Sam and a dummy made to look like Molly were the bait. For 3 nights, they waited. The silence was agonizing. Sam began to think their plan had failed. Maybe Peyton had decided to honor his word after all. Then on the 4th night, they came. They weren't thugs this time. They were quiet, shadowy figures who moved with military precision. They surrounded the farmhouse, their intent clear. This wasn't a warning. It was an assassination. From his hiding spot in the hayloft, Sam watched as two men crept onto the porch, carrying what looked like sticks of dynamite. They were going to blow the house to smithereens, leaving no evidence behind. He gave the signal, a flicker of a lantern. The night exploded, not with dynamite, but with the roar of rifles and shotguns. Kane's deputies opened fire from all sides. The assassins, caught completely by surprise, were pinned down. The firefight was short and brutal. When it was over, two of the assassins were dead, and one was captured, wounded, but alive. They had their proof. Peyton had broken his word. The deal was off. The captured assassin, a former soldier named Corrigan, was not a man inclined to loyalty when faced with a hangman's noose. He told them everything. He told them that Lord Peyton was preparing to take Kate back to England by private train, leaving in 2 days. He told them the train would be heavily guarded. And he told them that once the train crossed state lines, Peyton planned to stage an accident. Kate would never make it to England alive. The clock was ticking. "We can't stop that train legally," Kane said, pacing his office. "He'll be across the state line before I can get a federal warrant signed. By the time the law catches up with him, Kate will be gone, and he'll be untouchable." "Then we don't do it legally," Sam said, his eyes hard as flint. The rancher was gone. The soldier was back, and this time, he was on a mission of vengeance. "You're a U.S. Marshal. You can deputize a posse." Kane stopped pacing and looked at Sam. A slow smile spread across his face. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I can. I'm deputizing you, Sam McCarthy, and a few other boys I trust. We're going to stop that train, by any means necessary." The final confrontation was set. It wasn't just about the box anymore. It was about saving Kate. It was about a showdown between a corrupt empire and a handful of stubborn men who believed in justice. And Sam would ride at the head of them, ready to go through hell itself to get her back. The Vanderbilt private train was a gleaming black serpent, a rolling palace of polished brass and dark mahogany. It sat on a secluded siding outside of Denver, steam already pluming from its engine, preparing for a journey it would never finish. Sam, Marshall, Kane, and a posse of 10 hand-picked, stone-faced deputies watched it from a ridge overlooking the tracks. They were outnumbered 3-1 by Peyton's private army of hired guns, but they had the element of surprise, and they had a plan. "They'll be expecting an attack at a crossing, or in a tunnel," Kane said, looking through his spyglass. "We're not going to give them what they expect." The plan was bold, bordering on insane. 2 miles down the track, where the rails curved through a narrow canyon, a few of Kane's men were unbolting a section of the track. Not enough to cause a catastrophic derailment, but enough to force the train to a screeching, grinding halt. The rest of them would be waiting. Sam's heart pounded in his chest. He could see Kate through the window of the opulent parlor car. She was sitting stiffly, dressed in a fine traveling gown, a prisoner in silk. Lord Peyton was standing over her, a glass of champagne in his hand, looking smug and triumphant. The sight of him made Sam's hands clench into fists. The train's whistle blew, a long, mournful sound. It began to move slowly at first, then picking up speed, a symbol of arrogant, unstoppable power. "Let's ride," Kane grunted. They spurred their horses, thundering down the ridge to intercept their prey. When the train hit the loosened section of track, the sound was a horrific screech of tortured metal. It shuddered violently, sparks flying from its wheels as the engineer slammed on the brakes. It lurched to a halt right in the middle of the canyon, exactly where they wanted it. Before Peyton's guards could even react, the posse was on them. They descended on the train from both sides of the canyon, a whirlwind of gunfire and righteous fury. It was chaos. Men yelling, guns blazing, the canyon walls echoing with the sounds of battle. Sam had one target. He ignored the guards, leaping from his saddle onto the side of the moving cars, scrambling for a handhold. He swung himself onto the platform between 2 cars and kicked the door in. He found himself in a luxurious dining car. 2 guards turned, their eyes wide with surprise. Sam didn't hesitate. He was a force of nature, a father fighting for his family, a man fighting for the woman he loved. He moved through them with brutal efficiency, his fists in the butt of his rifle doing the work. He burst into the parlor car. Peyton spun around, his champagne glass shattering on the floor. He shoved Kate behind him and drew his pistol. "McCarthy!" he snarled, his handsome face twisted into an ugly mask of rage. "You just don't know when to die." "It's over, Peyton," Sam said, his rifle aimed steady at the nobleman's heart. "Let her go." Peyton laughed, a wild, unhinged sound. "It's never over." He grabbed Kate, pulling her in front of him, using her as a shield once again. "You can't shoot me without hitting her." But Kate was done being a shield. She drove her elbow back, hard into Peyton's ribs. He grunted in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all she needed. She dropped to the floor, leaving Sam with a clear shot. Sam fired. The bullet caught Peyton in the shoulder, spinning him around. He cried out in pain and fury, his own gun firing wildly, the shot going through the window. He wasn't done. Fueled by rage, he lunged at Sam. The two men crashed to the floor, grappling for control of the rifle. They rolled across the plush carpet, a desperate, violent struggle of kicks and punches. Peyton was surprisingly strong, his movements wiry and vicious. Outside, the gunfire was dying down. Kane and his men were winning. Peyton managed to land a solid punch to Sam's jaw, dazing him. He scrambled for Sam's fallen pistol, but Kate was there first. She scooped it up. She stood over them, the heavy Colt Peacemaker held in both of her trembling hands, pointed directly at her former fiancé. "Get away from him," she ordered, her voice shaking but clear as a bell. Peyton froze, looking up at her from the floor. He saw the look in her eyes and his arrogance finally crumbled, replaced by fear. He had pushed her too far. The woman he had tried to break was now holding his life in her hands. He scrambled away from Sam, his hands held up in surrender. It was over. Marshal Kane stormed into the car, his men behind him. They hauled the wounded, defeated Lord Peyton to his feet. Sam slowly got up, his body bruised and aching, but his heart soaring. He looked at Kate, who was still holding the gun, her eyes wide. He gently took it from her hands, and then he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly he thought she might break. She buried her face in his chest, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she let herself weep. Tears of relief, of sorrow, of a freedom she had paid for so dearly. "It's over," he whispered into her hair. "It's finally over." In the aftermath, the Vanderbilt Peyton empire crumbled. The contents of the box, now officially evidence in a federal investigation, were leaked to the press. The scandal was enormous. Reginald Vanderbilt, facing ruin and prosecution, used his remaining influence to cut a deal, turning state's evidence against his would-be son-in-law in exchange for a lighter sentence. Lord Peyton was convicted of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. His titles and wealth couldn't save him from a long prison sentence. The dust settled. Spring came to the territory, breathing new life into the land. Sam stood on the porch of a new cabin, built on the ashes of the old one, but bigger, stronger. The land was his now, bought and paid for with a portion of the reward money from the federal government for his role in bringing down the conspiracy. He watched as Kate taught a small group of children from the surrounding ranches, Molly sitting at her feet, listening intently. Kate had used her own inheritance, what was left of it, to start a small school, fulfilling a dream she never knew she had. She wore a simple cotton dress, and her hair was tied back with a piece of twine. Sam had never seen her look more beautiful. She looked up and saw him watching, and her face broke into a radiant smile. It was a smile that promised a future, a smile that promised peace. Love, Sam had learned, didn't always come like a gentle sunrise. Sometimes it came like a storm, tearing your world apart and forcing you to rebuild it from the ground up, stronger than it was before. His old life was gone, burned to ash. But from those ashes, he had built something real, something true, with a woman of incredible courage and a daughter who was safe and happy. He was no longer hiding from the world. He had faced down his past and the demons of others and had come out the other side. He was Sam McCarthy, a rancher, a father, a husband, and he was finally, truly home. If this story of grit, justice, and unlikely love on the frontier got your heart pounding, then do us a favor and smash that subscribe button. Let us know in the comments below what you think is more powerful, money or courage. We read every single one. Until next time, stay vigilant and remember that sometimes you have to fight for the life you deserve.